In this video, I'm going to show you how to get some data from a database and display it in a data grid. And I'm going to show you a slightly different way to loop through the rows in a data reader and populate the data in a data grid. So again, using the ticket booking system, this is the one that we used for. I've just had a bit of a screen blip there. This is the one that we used for just pulling the artists from the database and populating the drop-down combo list. I'm going to reuse the same application, the same ticket booking application, and the gig database that we used for that tutorial as well. So I'm just going to go to my toolbox and drag the data grid view from the toolbox onto my form. And I'm going to give it a sensible name. I always forget to do this bit. So I'm going to call it Data Grid View Venues. So we're going to pull all the venue information from the database and put it into this grid here. Now, I think this little arrow here, if you click on that little arrow there, you can add columns. So we want to add some columns to this grid here. So the first column I'm going to add, I want to map the columns on the grid to map onto the venue database. So I want venue name, venue location, and telephone number. So the first one will be called, I'll just call it venue for venue name. We'll just add that. The second one was location. And the third one was telephone. Oops. And so we'll close that down there and just hide that little arrow there. Can't see the telephone number, so I'm going to just drag this along so that all of the fields are displayed within that data grid view. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a button so that when we click on the button, the venue data is populated in here. So again, I'm just going to drag a button across from my toolbox onto my form, and I'm going to give it a sensible name, like button show venues, and I'm going to give it a sensible caption as well, so we'll change the text for that. So that's going to be show venues. And I'll just make the button a bit bigger because it's too small to show all that text in there, so I'm just going to drag it along a little bit. So what I want to happen is when I click on this button, I want to run an SQL query on the database that pulls all of the venue information back from here. I'll close this table, otherwise it'll lock the table, so I won't be able to do it. Excuse me. It's not responding. It'll close in a minute. It's just because the recording equipment's running in the background. Okay, so if I go to form main and I find the button click event, so if I look for the button show venues, then I look for the click event over here, that gives me the code to handle when this button is clicked. So basically in here is where I want to start setting up my SQL, creating my database command, opening my database connection, and executing my command on that database. So just like before, I'm going to create my SQL string. And it's just a simple select statement, select all from venue. And I need to create a database command. And that is going to be a new command. So I'll just do it all in one line here. Just better to, although I've shown you how to do it different ways before, it is better to try and streamline your code and do it as efficiently as possible, basically. It looks neater and it's easier to read. So, oops, not in there. I'm going to pass in my SQL to my command, and I'm going to pass in the database connection. And just to remind you, I declared the database connection right up at the top here, where I added a link to my database. Okay, so that was already created, that variable. So after I've created my command, I want to open up the database connection. And always remember to close your connection. And in between is where I'm going to execute that command. So because I'm returning multiple rows, remember if you're returning multiple rows, you have to execute a reader command, and we use the reader object to be able to store the multiple rows or execute the multiple rows too. OLE DB data reader. So that should execute this command on the database. So just like before we can do anything with that data, we need to check, does the data reader have any rows? If it does, then do something with it. So what we're going to do is read each row in that data reader. And then what I want to do is, basically, for each row that is pulled out of the database, I want to populate a row in this data grid here. So we do that by saying, I can't remember what I called my data grid. Data grid view venues. So I'm going to add a row to that data grid, and I'm going to say, first of all, I want the venue information. So actually cancel that. So I think I spoke to a few of you about this in class, but I'll just remind you, these are the columns here, and this is 0 based. So it means this is column 0, this is column 1, this is column 2, and this is column 3. So if I want to access something in this column here from my data reader object, that's column 1. So what I'm going to say is basically get the data from the data reader that is in column 1. And I'm going to get it as a string because it's the name of the venue and I know that's a string. So the next thing I want to do is get the location. Again, that's a string, and that's in column 2. And the last thing is get the telephone number. And is that a string? I think it might be, you know. Shall we have a look? No, it's text in this database. It could have been a number. Okay, close that down. So that's also a string, so that kind of makes it nice and easy for it. And that's in column 3. Okay, and actually that's it. That's all I should need to do to populate the data from that SQL query into the grid. So let's just run it and check it. So when I click on show venues, that data is populated from the database into my grid. And that's how you load your data from the database into a data grid view.